thanks for joining me today once again. Today we will talk about authorization. As we discussed, in security, basically there are two basic fundamental theory that you have to understand. One is authentication, which we already discussed in our last video. In this video, we will focus on what is authorization. So guys, like authentication, authorization is also applicable to only protected or secured resource. Those resources which are protected or which are not open to use by anyone. Application or resources which need login to access that application are called secured resource. For example, Google, Facebook, and so on. In Google, particularly Gmail. So guys, what is authorization? Authorization follows authentication. After authentication, it is the time where authorization will happen. In this case, you have to think about one application with multiple services. Let's talk about Facebook. Facebook, in order to get into Facebook, anyone has to log in. Means I can log in, you can log in. So without login, you cannot use Facebook. That phase is called authentication, mandatory phase. Now you want to use certain group. So and let's say that group is not the open group. So first you have to join that group. Until unless you will not join that group, you will not be able to access activity of that group. So this process where you will request for joining that group, basically this process is called authorizing. Someone will authorize you, someone will consent you for access of that group, and that particular guy who is admin of that group called owner of the resource. Correct? So once you will have consent or approval from owner of that resource to use that group, then you are authorized to access activity of that group. So basically, and again, when you will authorize, first you have to get into Facebook. So basically authorization always follows authentication. So once you are in Facebook, then time for authorization, then this is the time for authorization where you will authorize to get access of activity of that particular group. So guys, to understand it in better manner, what we can do is let's go to the system and try to understand it in more clear way. Also guys, if you are new to the channel, then subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so that you will get early notification, and like, share and comment on videos. Thank you guys. Let's go to the system.
Okay guys, if we want to understand definition of authorization, authorization is a process to provide access, approval or consent for usage of certain resource. It follows after authentication and applies to only secured or protected resources. So in a secured resource or protected resource, how the process follows is, first authentication will take place. You have to authenticate to that application, and then your application will check whether whatever you are requesting for, you are authorized, or do you have proper consent or approval to access that particular resource or not. That's what authorization means. Let's try to understand this by using a diagram. So here end user is there. User tries to access application or resource. Let's say this is your resource and you are trying to access this resource or application. Since this resource is a protected resource, as soon as you will try to access, it will challenge you. It will ask you for login, and user will be challenged for login and authentication. So credential submitted to resource, and in a good scenario, login success will result with successful authentication. So done. authentication is done. Now what is going to happen? Now once user successfully authenticated, this is the time for authorization. For example, an employee will not have access to approved time report. So normal employee will not have access to approve the time report. You can uh, let's say you are working for a certain organization and you are submitting your time sheet or time report. Let's say so you will submit the time report. Now your manager will have access to approve that. You will not have access. Basically, you will not be able to see the link in your application to approve the timesheet. So that's what I'm trying to highlight here. This is where application will check for role. And based on role for one user, it will allow time report approval and another not. So very similar to the one example which we discussed in case of Facebook. So you simply log into Facebook and you want to access certain group. Until unless you are not authorized to see activity of that group, you will not be able to see. Correct? Let's say that group is not an open group. So what you need to do, you have to request for join group. Admin has to approve that request and then you will able to access or see activity of that group. So in this case, who is the resource owner? Group admin is the resource owner. So this is what authorization means on a high level. So guys, if you have any question for authorization or you want to discuss something, please comment below so that I will try to get some other video to clarify your doubt. Thank you guys.